She asks what I'm crying for. I tell her it is the same thing dull things are dying for, that in my last lifetime I was ultramarinian.
My name is Inua Ellams. I was born in 1984. I have 3 sisters and 2 parents like most people. I was born in Jos Plateau State in Nigeria and here in Nigeria, and I live in London at the moment. But I write poetry and plays for a living, and I'm also a graphic designer and a visual artist. Poetry started when I was first a child, or rather I was enchanted by the magic line that comes out of a pencil or a pen. When I was a kid, I would just draw for hours on end, and I would draw to entertain myself, my sisters, and my father and my mother, my family. When I was in boarding school, the same thing. My boys and I would sit down and draw cartoons and comic books about the seniors, and would be punished for that when we get in trouble. And I was just enchanted that with a piece of paper and a pen, you could create magic. For the duration of this piece of paper, you are essentially a godlike figure. Everything you draw on it suddenly exists, and no one can tell you got it wrong or got it right. So I grew up being enchanted by this and just wanted to do this for as much as I can and for as often as I could. When we left Nigeria and moved to London, financially things became difficult. I began painting, and it reached this crisis point where we had such little money, we couldn't afford paint. And then I began to write poetry because I tried to paint pictures with words. And that's kind of how, a lot of my poetry is very, 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 very visual. I spent 18 years up to that moment just thinking about imagery and how imagery works. So when I write poetry, it's the same thing. So that's kind of the abridged version of how I started. There were a couple of other things that happened in my life that gave rise to the final catalyst moment. In 2002, we returned to London. And I used to stay up late at night after my parents had gone to sleep. I was a teenage boy, and teenage boys have certain urges, if you understand. And there was this program called HBO Real Sex. And it was just like news reporters who go around asking people about what they did with their partners and stuff like that. It was very seedy, kind of cheesy program. But I used to stay up and watch late at night after my parents were asleep. And then there was they interviewed these women called the Punani Poets. And these were women who spoke about women's rights and women's sexuality and stuff like that in California. And once there was a poet who was reading a poem, and beside her there was a woman completely nude, naked in a bathtub, pouring water on herself and dancing erotically to this poet reading a poem. And I thought, if this is happening in London, then I want to be there. So I got on Google and typed on poetry, then went down. And I went to this poetry event, which was nothing like that. It was just people sitting in a room drinking coffee, this stereotypical poetry kind of thing, and reading poems to each other and applauding. I remember I stood up to read my first poem ever, and I was so nervous, I was shaking, and I couldn't even read the words, but somehow I got through it. And Nee Parks, who's a writer, a Ghanaian brother based in London, Nee liked what I did and told me, you have something here, you need to read this book. Don't read that book, do this, do this, do this. And that's how I began to get a critical eye into poetry. I began to think about what poetry was. And that was in 2003. And that's how I began working as a poet, or learning more about the life of a poet and exactly what that entails. I am here as part of the first Lagos Theatre Festival to perform my first...
A lot of people say there's no place like home, but at Limelight Hotel and Suites, we have a place that's just like home. Limelight Hotel and Suites is located in the serene and homely countryside of Agoiwoye, Ogun State. Limelight Hotel and Suites offers you nothing but the best in hospitality and facilities that you will not find anywhere. We have 3 bars, an oriental restaurant with a guarantee of uninterrupted power supply, and reliable internet facilities, not forgetting our ATM machines and POS terminals to give you the ease of cashless fun. Come relax and retreat into the calm embrace of Limelight Hotel and Suites. For more information, log on to www.limelight.hotel.com or email us on info@limelight.hotel.com or call us on 0807 097 1904. Limelight Hotel and Suites, taking you...
Play called The 14th Tale. So the play is called The 14th Tale, and it kind of details me just growing up and getting in trouble. I was beaten mercilessly when I was on the Dogbolu. For just those 2 years, I was punished, I was caned, everything from being, woke in the middle of the night and forced to pump, where you do that and just bend up and down for hours. The story is very much about play and about the consequences of play, about understanding also that there is a natural order to the shape of the world. There's always cause and effect. Then eventually your greatest causes will create effects that eventually will topple you, and you'll have to understand that that you need to plateau a little bit. So it's about my grandfather. It begins with a story about my grandfather stealing meat to my father, who was chased through secondary school by one of the bullies he was making fun of, and then to me and just punishing one of my own seniors. We used to play this prank with toothpaste. I'm not going to give the game away, but we got into trouble for that. So the play is about and it follows the journey of this natural born troublemaker to Dublin and to London before finally it ends. And it's also about my father and an illness he had. But it's very funny. I'd say if you come to the festival, just come with an open mind and come and expect to be entertained. I tell a story, and I tell it using my body and using poetry as well. So it's a complete one-man show. So it's just me on stage for 50 minutes running around and telling the story. I have, it's very, very, very bare. I have one chair and one torchlight and an empty stage, and there's a back cloth which just has a graphic design / illustrating piece of art that illustrates the story. But we just added that at the end, so the play can work without it. It's very, very simple show to tour. And so that's it. It's just one man show. I have a production manager who came with me from London, who creates the light and the sound effects, and I have a tour manager who just manages everything.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, it is that we are powerful beyond measure. This means we can reason faster than speeding fists, can whisper louder than atomic voices, can dream bigger than nuclear slaps. And the only excuse that could stand is not having enough pillows to go around.
I've traveled a lot. Last year I went to Australia, I went to Malaysia, I went to Ireland, I went to Chicago, I went to the States. Just reading poetry and speaking with people who also are beginning to write poetry. And I was almost like a mentor / a workshop facilitator, and teaching them the ways in which you can make your poetry more delicious to the ear and to the eye. So I've taught a lot. I've done some amazing things. I've worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company in London. My play, The 14th Tale, was the first ever one-man play by Africa, which sold out at the National Theatre. I think only 2 people of African descent have sold out plays there, and the second was Wole Soyinka. So I'm ticking that box, and I'm not sure if Wole knows that I exist yet. But so I've definitely, those are a few things that I've done. Last year, I worked with the Houses of Parliament. I was commissioned to write a poem about what it means to be British in 2012 in the time of the Olympics as well. So I've worked with politicians and filmmakers, and I've traveled a fair bit. But there's so much more of the world to see. Hi, my name is Inua Ellams. I'm a poet, a playwright, and a performer, and you're watching Culture Space on Hitz.